Hey guys, my name is Haley and today I'm going to be filming my June wrap-up. Sorry for not filming as many videos as I planned to this month, but we're going to get back on track for June, my birthday month. So I actually read a decent amount this month. I think I read 10 books. I was on a kick for like the first week and a half of the month, and then I didn't read anything for 2 weeks, and then I read a couple things in the last few days. So the normal, like, spontaneous kind of at random reading that I've had all year, but I read a lot, so that's good. Also, bear with me, I'm still getting my voice back from having a cold, so we're still recovering. But the first book that I read this month was Without You by Anthony Rapp. This is his memoir for the time, most of it is spent on the time that he was working on Rent on Broadway and how he got to know Jonathan Larson and how my favorite musical came to be. I've wanted to read this for years. I tried to listen to it on audio several years ago and the audiobook was not narrated by Anthony, and I was like, I don't like memoirs being read by other people for the most part, especially with Anthony, who I know really, really well for having followed him since I was like 11 years old when I got into Rent. So I wanted to read it physically. I finally got it physically and I read it. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I loved hearing more about Rent. I read a lot of things about Rent. I think you might see it over there. There. I have that book, which talks a lot also of how Rent came to be a musical and like the process of how Jonathan wrote the show and the people that he gathered to be in the cast and everything like that. And Michael Greif, who else worked, he was the director, or the producer, director. I believe he's a Broadway director. He also worked on another favorite show of mine, which is why I know him and his like works really well. And he constitutes a lot of what happened. We hear a lot about Michael Greif in this. We hear a lot about Anthony and his relationships with other members of the cast. And also, this gave a big insight into how Anthony grew up, which I found very interesting, which I did not know about his childhood life before he became an actor. Or obviously his romantic life I didn't know very much about, so that was interesting in this. It did make Anthony out to be a more realistic human being, because you know when you followed an actor for like half of your life and they're just someone else in your head, and then like something takes you down a couple notches to realize that they're a normal human who makes mistakes. That's what this memoir felt like, which is not a bad thing. It's just helps with not putting people up on a pedestal. That happened with another book this month as well, but I'll get to that later. But I enjoyed this. I'm very excited to have finally read it. And then the very next day, I just binged this entire like 230-page book called The Sleep Experiment. This story is based on a creepypasta, which last month I read the creepypasta collection that was a bunch of short stories based on creepypastas. This one is based on my favorite creepypasta. That was a huge thing back when I was a teenager. It was also a big thing on Tumblr. That's probably how I found it, and half of the creepypastas that I read. If you didn't know, that is a website that writes a bunch of urban legends and scary stories and tries to pass them off as true, but we assume that they are fiction. It was a huge thing on Tumblr back in the day. Just trust me on this. If you're my age, you probably know what creepypasta is. And this is based on my favorite one, which is called it was called The Russian Sleep Experiment, I believe is the name of this creepypasta. And this is a world in which a scientist in modern day is trying to recreate that sleep experiment and find out what would happen to the test subjects. So he gets 2 random traveling Australians to go into a room where gas is being pumped out at all times of a certain concoction that this doctor scientist has made. And he wants to know what will happen if people go without sleep for an indeterminate amount of time. And what actually happens to the human psyche when they don't sleep and don't have to sleep, and it all goes downhill from there. This was fine. I thought it was a fun idea. I probably enjoyed it more than your average person because I really like the story that it's based on, and it does follow it relatively closely. The writing in this is not great. I will say that. The pacing was great. The literal act of writing and like word and sentence structure is very, very simple, but also made it very, very easy to read. So I did blow through it in like an evening. It's pretty creepy. If you don't know the other story, this might come as a surprise, but it goes down a very similar path to the creepypasta story. So I enjoyed it. I gave it like 3.5 stars. Will I read anything else by Jeremy Bates? Probably not, but you know, it was a fun read. Next up, I read a book by an author that kind of I've had very hit or miss situations with, and that is TJ Klune. I loved his book, The House in the Cerulean Sea, and I hated his book, Wolfsong. So I was like, oh no, am I gonna hate all of his books? Because I am very interested in a lot of his books and series. And I was like, okay, I'm going to cautiously step into this one. It was called Into This River I Drown. And the reason I picked this one up in particular is because it is a fallen angel that falls to earth and falls in love with a man. As you guys know, I have been rewatching Supernatural. Does that not sound like Dean and Castiel? So, I assume this was going to be Castiel and Dean fanfiction. Destiel fanfiction. And I went through and even like read reviews, made sure there was nothing like that happened in Wolfsong that I wouldn't like in this, and like that whole situation. So I went into this so cautiously. I literally got to the part where the angel is introduced. This is not a spoiler. It happens very early on. I got to the point where the angel is introduced, and the angel's name is Kaliel. Kaliel. They call him Cal. And I was like, anybody who is telling me or tries to tell me that this is not Destiel fanfiction is delusional. He literally has the most similar name to Castiel I've ever heard in my entire life, and I thought it was hilarious. I literally put the book down and laughed for like a solid 5 minutes and then continued reading. And this story is not just about their romance. It is very much like an angel falls in love with human and that whole thing, but there's also an underlying like storyline about our main character and his dad, who had passed away, and there's like a mystery surrounding that, and just the idea of this tiny little town and how they react to Kaliel falling down and Kaliel trying to remember how he got there. It's very reminiscent of Castiel in the first like season that he's in of Supernatural, but has more in-your-face romantic undertones, while Supernatural tried to keep it more on the down low at first. I really enjoyed this. I really liked the ending and the way that faith was discussed in this. Like, it was a very human look at faith and how people might not believe in some things, or they might believe in part of this thing and this thing of this religion, but not quite the religion as a whole. And that was a very interesting conversation. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4.5 stars, and this has given me more hope that I will enjoy more TJ Klune than I thought that I would after reading Wolfsong. Also, if you were like me and Destiel is one of your OTPs and has been for a very long time, please read this. It's very satisfying if you think of it in that perspective. Next up, I read the new Neal Shusterman book because I've been reading a lot of his books over the last few years, and I enjoy his sci-fi books for the most part, sci-fi and dystopian. So I read Game Changer. This was a really fun, like, parallel worlds situation where this boy is on a football field, he does a tackle, and he realizes little things about the world have changed since he got hit with this tackle that kind of felt weird, and his head did a weird thing. And each time that he plays a football game and gets tackled, the world changes in small ways or large ways, or he changes in small ways or large ways. And it's very entertaining. It's very interesting. I love the concept. Like, the very first one that happens is he's coming home from the game and he realizes that stop signs, like, he knows in his head that stop signs have always been red, and he doesn't really notice it because nobody thinks about stop signs in their daily life. And then he realizes that all stop signs and stoplights are now blue instead of red. And he's like, didn't stop signs used to be red? And everybody around him's like, what are you talking about? So that sets up a very good interpretation of how this book goes. It's of him trying to like make sure that he's not crazy and also trying to figure out how to fix this situation. It was very entertaining. It was very fast to read. I read it on my Kindle in like a day and a half. I love Neal Shusterman's premises. That's my favorite thing about his books, so I was very excited to read this. I think this was on my most anticipated books of the year, so I finally read one of those. But I gave this 4 stars. It was very fun ride, very good sci-fi novel. Next up, I read the sequel to one of my favorite books of the year so far, and that is Chaos on Catnet. This is the sequel to Catfishing on Catnet, which is one of the like 3 books that I've read this year that is going to be on my favorite books of the year list. This wasn't quite as well polished in my opinion as the first one, but this had an additional storyline of a cult and like the small line to walk between religion and cults and the differences. It also had this like virtual reality game that was literally Pokemon Go. I have literally been describing this book as if you combined all of the elements of artificial intelligence, which was in the first one, Pokemon Go as an app, and that concept of an app, cults and the fine line between religion and cults. And then Parler, which is the app that the insurrectionists on January 6th used to plan the storming of the Capitol, and is a very conservative-sided, Trump-leaning situation. If you combined all four of those things into a book that is a contemporary novel that happens to have a lot of mystery and just these really cute representation, like great representation friendships of people all over the LGBTQ spectrum, if you put all of those into this book, that's what this is. Which sounds like a really weird combination of things, but it really works. The only issue I had with this was the ending was so rushed and it felt like it just cut off randomly. And like, obviously I know this is a series, but it was so sudden. But that's my explanation of this book. I adored this. I love our characters. I love the way this played out. I really liked the talk about religion and cults, and I do recommend it if any of those things sound interesting. Next up, I read another book that's going to be on my favorite books of the year, and I can't decide between Radio Silence and this one, of which is going to be my favorite. I feel like I have to sit with both of them, and that is Loveless by Alice Oseman. I cried so many times while reading this. Sunil is my favorite character. He deserves the entire world. I really, really liked being in our main character's head for this, as she is discovering her sexuality, which turns out to be asexual, and she doesn't know anything about those things. And she's wondering why she's never been attracted to anyone in her life and why she never really has any romantic feelings for people. And she slowly figures this out as she goes to college and meets a lot of people that tell her a lot. I really like the friendship between her and her roommate, which seems to be this very unexpected friendship because they're kind of opposites, but the opposites attract thing, but not in a romantic attraction thing. That was another thing I liked about Alice Oseman's other book, is that you thought it was going to be a romance between this girl and this guy, and it just wasn't. That's what I felt like this was like. But I adored this. I love Alice Oseman. I've read 3 of her books now, I would think is most of them. I haven't read Heartstopper, I believe she also wrote, which is graphic novels. But I adore the way she writes her characters. I adore the stories that she comes up with and the representation that is in all of her books. And I want to read everything that she ever writes forever. I gave this 5 stars. I cried so many times, literally so many times. I was just sitting there reading this on like a Friday night or something, and I'd like every 20 pages I would be like, I just found this relatable in certain aspects, so I cried a lot and I very much enjoyed it. Also, this cover is stunning. I love this color. Next up, I read another hard-hitting contemporary, and that is Far From the Tree. This is a book about 3 people who were put in the foster care system by their mother, and they all ended up going to different families, and they find out that they are related to each other and tried to get together and meet up to get to know each other. And it's a heartbreaking story. I will warn you right there, but I really enjoyed this. I loved the sibling dynamic that just kind of fell into place, which I imagine does not always happen in this situation if the situation were to ever occur, but I really liked the important topics that were touched on in this, the overall view of adoption, and the way that it can affect different people's lives in different ways. And I highly recommend. I gave it 4.5 stars, and I also like teared up a little bit at the end of it. Next up, I read a really quick audiobook, aka the first audiobook I've read in I don't even know how long, but it was literally an hour and a half, so actually 45 minutes for me because I listened to everything on 2 times speed, and that is Behold a Pale Horse. This is very much a like conspiracy theorist dream. I am not quite a conspiracy theorist. I'm familiar with a lot of conspiracy theories, but I don't go hard into any of them. And I gave this 3 stars. It was a very interesting look at how this author interprets the world. I believe he's an ex-CIA agent, and it is from like the 90s, and it is very, very eerie how it is showing and being very reminiscent of what is happening now and with the pandemic and everything, so that was terrifying. But I gave this 3 stars. I took it with a grain of salt and moved on. And then next I read Aesop finally. This is a book that I got last summer at Half Price Books and just never read because it was a more dense adult literary fiction. Not quite literary fiction, more like a dense adult thriller. And I randomly picked this up while I was like sitting outside and reading a lot a couple weekends ago. And I picked this up because, if you can tell from the title and know anything about the Bible, Esau is the brother of Jacob in the Bible. So I was like, oh, that would probably be really interesting. And this turned into a lot more dense of a thriller and didn't quite have to do with anything related to the Bible besides the name. But it is essentially this mountaineer who finds this skull, brings it back to this university with a scientist or what's she called, an epidemiologist? I think that's what they were. And she wants to go on another hiking trip to try and find more members of this newly discovered animal or species. It's essentially based on the idea of the abominable snowman or Bigfoot. In this case, it would be more abominable snowman because it's in like the mountains in the snow, and it's a thriller from there. I thought this was really fun. It was really slow in the beginning with all of the scientific jargon, and then it picked up in the middle, and then the ending was really good. I really liked the ending. So I gave this 3.75 stars. This has no biblical elements besides the names that they chose to use, so not quite what I was expecting, but I did enjoy it as a thriller, and I'm like vaguely interested in more of Philip Kerr's work, possibly. I might look up and see if he has anything else that has an interesting premise. And then the next one goes into movies that I've watched this month, so I will talk about the movies first. So I nanny a 4-year-old and 11-month-old, and the 4-year-old we've watched every movie imaginable during the pandemic on like Disney Plus and everything. So I started being like, okay, we're gonna think of movies I enjoyed as a child that she might like. And I realized that none of them are on Netflix, and I owned 2 of them already. So I was like, okay, I'll just bring the ones that I already owned. She really liked them. And so I bought like a couple more of the DVDs of anything that was not on any streaming service. And so we've been like making our way through those. So I'm just gonna run through them real quick. We have watched this version of Alice in Wonderland, which is my personal favorite version. This is a made-for-TV movie from 1999, and I love it because it has Gene Wilder in it, who is the source of this quest that I've gone on in the last couple of weeks, which I will talk about in a moment. We have Matilda. She really liked Matilda. I love this movie. I hadn't seen it in a million years, and it was great to watch it again. We have The Little Vampire, which was, I would argue, one of my like top 3 favorite movies for most of my life. This is a Disney Channel movie that they used to play all the time, and I never owned the DVD until now because I bought it for this reason, and I'm so happy that I did because I love this movie. And then another movie based on a book, and that is The Neverending Story. Ignore The Neverending Story 2. I will never watch that again. The rest of the Neverending Story movies are terrible. The first one, however, is fantastic, and Falkor is everything. He is the luck dragon in this, and this was also probably top 3 favorite movies of all time as a child for me. I also would argue this is probably one of the 4-year-old's favorite movies that I showed her. She loved it way more than I expected her to. And then we watched Cats. This is a musical. This is a musical that a lot of people hate. Do not watch the new version movie, Tim Burton-esque version of this. I hate that. It's terrible. It ruins everything about it. But if you want a stage show with a lot of ballet and like contemporary ballet dancing mixed together and some cool costumes and like some pretty music, that's what I always recommend Cats is. I showed her this one because I actually watched Cats for the first time when I was 5, like a year older than her, and I've loved it ever since. It was the first musical that I ever saw. I saw it live when I was like 10 or 11 at a theater near me and never turned back. It will always be one of my favorites, and she loved this way more than I thought she would. She does really also like The Greatest Showman we've been watching for the last several months, which is my favorite movie. So I figured she would like it because she really likes the dancing in that, and I knew she would like ballet. So she loves this so much. Her favorite is Victoria. And my favorite is Mistopheles, who is not on this cover, but he is the magic one, if you know anything about Cats. I know a lot of people have very strong opinions about this musical, but I love it, and I have always loved it, and I will always defend it. I will not defend that new movie, though the new movie is terrible and creepy. And then we watched Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the original one from 1971. And this was the source, this and Alice in Wonderland were the source of me remembering how much I love Gene Wilder, who is the man who plays Willy Wonka, and he has a part as a turtle in this version of Alice in Wonderland, and that's why it's my favorite version. And I've apparently loved Gene Wilder since I was a kid. I knew that because I loved him as Willy Wonka. I had never done like a deep dive into any of his other works, and so I picked up his memoir, which is called Kiss Me Like a Stranger, which I just finished right before filming this video actually, and I gave it 4 stars. It was another situation like the Anthony Rapp book where it gave a more well-rounded view of Gene Wilder as a person, which is not even his real name. It's his stage name. And this chronicled him working in Hollywood and on Broadway and in all over the world as an actor, and like the mid-1900s, which is not a time period that I know a lot about. If you didn't know, Gene Wilder passed away a couple of years ago from complications with Alzheimer's. And to like the day that he got sick and passed away, people would always see him on the street and go, oh my gosh, Willy Wonka! And he never told anyone that he had a lot of illnesses because he didn't want to ruin the magic of people believing that he was Willy Wonka, which makes me want to cry. But I loved him as an actor. He's probably one of my favorite actors of all time, and this has given me a list of his other movies that I really want to watch after reading this book where he chronicles a lot of the movies that he was in. Also, it made me very interested to hear that Willy Wonka actually did not do well in the box office when it came out and somehow became like a cult classic, like kids movie over several years later, which I find fascinating. But I adore him in both of these movies. I've really liked getting more of a perspective on who he was as a person when he was alive, and I'm going to continue to watch more of his movies and read more of his things. He also wrote some novels, which I will probably read. But yes, I've been on a Gene Wilder kick for the last like 2 or 3 weeks, ever since me and the toddler watched Willy Wonka. She also really liked this, and we kept saying that we thought she would be scared of the Oompa Loompas because I feel like it's very 50-50 whether people were terrified of the Oompa Loompas or thought they were fine. I was someone who thought they were fine, but I know a lot of people that were scared of them, and she thought they were funny, so we were safe there. But yes, that is everything that I have read and watched in the month of May, which was actually quite a lot. I didn't watch any TV. I was not in a TV watching mood. I did watch like a decent amount of K-pop, but not as much as I've been watching for the last couple of weeks. But yeah, that's a pretty good stack, I think, for a month. And I think I'm at like 35 books of the year, so that's not bad. That was a much better place than I was in like 2 months ago. But I hope you all enjoyed this. Let me know if you liked any of those movies as a kid or as an adult in the comments down below. I would love to hear everybody's opinion on Cats as a musical. I know people have very strong opinions about it. Just know that I do enjoy it. But talk to me in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.